Hi, I'm Greg Farrar. It's December 27th, 2020, and this is my latest COVID-19 Trends live stream. As usual, there are probably some technical difficulties here. It's complaining to me about my video resolution, but I think my resolution is good enough. I complained about it last time. One of these days I'll fix that. But if you're really seeing some sort of terrible problem in the stream, whether the audio or the video, for instance, if it's very blurry and you can't read the words, drop a message in chat. I will try to pay attention to chat. And even if I somehow don't notice you in live chat, I always do see all the messages that are sent later. They all show up on the video. So let's get going. I'll start with the countries of the world, then the states of the United States, and then the counties of California. This one I hope to make a short one. I hope this one doesn't go over an hour as so many of mine seem to go. Let's see if we can make this 30 minutes. So here in the countries of the world, if we look at the severity metric, first of all, there's this outrageous spike by Turkey. That probably is not real. It's possible, but more likely that's a data anomaly, especially given that it immediately receded back to a level that's kind of in the middle of the pack. So let's ignore that spike and just say this is the graph of the current top 20 most severely hit countries. Severity is a metric I use that combines both the total number of cases, or the daily cases per million, DCPM, and the weekly growth. Those two numbers together, they're combined to to give a single number that attempts to quantify how bad the epidemic is in a particular area. If you have a higher growth, it makes it worse. If you have a higher number of cases, it makes it worse. If you have both, it makes it extra worse. And what we're seeing in all of these, I think, is mostly, well, actually, I think what we're probably seeing is a high number of cases, because we are beginning to see some of these bend downward. But you can't tell from this graph whether, for instance, Lithuania has a high severity because it has a large number of cases per million people, or because it has maybe a small number of cases per million people but is growing extraordinarily fast. We will break it down into its constituents, though, shortly into the daily cases and the growth, and we can see then, if we happen to look at Lithuania, why is it that Lithuania is the most severely hit country right now? But in any case, it is. At 1,200, that's a very high number. I think of 200, sometimes 400 as a hotspot. Anything over 200 or 400 is a hotspot. So all these top 20 countries are hotspots. Lebanon, the lowest, is 340. The rest are all higher than that. Lithuania, Netherlands, Panama, Denmark. We're generally seeing what we've seen, which is a kind of a Eurocentric pandemic, at least at the moment. It certainly has had its time in South America and originally in Asia, but right now it's about Europe, and it's especially about Eastern Europe. If you look through the list of these top 20, a lot of them are Eastern Europe. On the other hand, we do see Denmark and Sweden, so Western Europe has not completely receded yet. We also see Baltics and a little bit of the Middle East, especially the Western Middle East, which seems to be coming on maybe as what might possibly be the next epicenter, if there is one. We can also hope that, given that there are 2 vaccines and 20 more on the way, well, at least one more on the way, but probably, quite possibly 20 different vaccines will be coming in the next year. I think we can imagine that there may never be another major bump of the sort that we've just seen. But that is speculation. And my speculations are not always 100% accurate. One thing we can note here is that Denmark, which I've mentioned is kind of unusual in being Western Europe and still very severe right now, is receding. It's the fastest receding, I'd say, in severity right now. So that, again, an indication that the worst is over for Western Europe. Eastern Europe still very bad. We can also see Serbia, which was one of the worst just a few weeks ago or a month ago, now down under 500, still in the top 25, but pretty bad. United States alone, since I do focus on the United States, has had its bump. We're going to see this over and over today. It had a real spike up to about November 20th. After November 20th, it started to decline. And what I imagine would have simply been a bell-shaped peak and down, except then Thanksgiving came. And my guess is the reason that the United States fell off the wagon there is because of Thanksgiving. And but then Thanksgiving was over, and again it continued or resumed its decline. But now here comes Christmas and the other holidays, and this is the big question of the day, just like it was a week ago when I did my last of these, is what effect will the Christmas holidays have on this curve? In any case, in severity, the United States is still very bad. 600 is certainly a hot spot. It is declining in severity, and we'll see where it goes from there. Let's break this down into the two components of this particular signal. The daily cases per million and the growth rate. So daily cases per million is a graph. This is kind of the traditional graph you tend to see except I've overlaid a million of them with different colors. But the traditional graph, if you were to look at just the United States, would say, oh, look, the United States has been rising and rising. And here it had a peak in April and new cases. It had a peak of cases in July and had a new peak much, much higher in December. And now maybe it's dropping away a little bit. That's the total cases graph, or the daily cases, the cases per day graph. I also do have on this website a graph of total cases, but I just don't pay any attention to it because I'm more interested in the daily changes. I'm more interested in the short-term predictions, and I'm more interested in being able to compare regions, which can only be done if we adjust for population. So for instance, the United States and the Netherlands, I've lived in both, and look, they're almost exactly at the same place right now, 620, 630. United States and Netherlands, we can say, are equally bad right now. That was just pure random that I happened to land upon those two being equally bad. If I looked at something like the UK, I might have found something that isn't equally bad. But we can look at the UK and say the United States has, if we were to look at a graph of total cases, it's running at 200,000 a day or whatever it's doing now, a huge number of cases, vastly more per day than the UK has. But once you adjust for population, they're at least within the same ballpark. But the United States is about twice as bad as the UK right now. On the other hand, the UK is shooting upwards, whereas the United States shows every sign of peaking and falling away. We'll see, but that's certainly what this graph shows in the short to medium term, is a decline in daily cases in the United States, even after we've added in this 14-day rolling average, which the 14-day rolling average balances out this graph. It denoises it a little bit so that we do actually not get pulled super high or super low by randomly anomalous days of reporting, which can happen, for instance, on Christmas, where if you looked at the data from Christmas for the United States, suddenly it was shockingly low. Wow, the United States only has 80,000 cases or something instead of 200,000. I'm kind of making those numbers up, but it's something like that. Suddenly half what it had been. And I did not suddenly have a live stream that day to say, we're out of the woods. Look, the United States is half where it was and is dropping by 50% a day. It was just an anomaly, and in that case, it's an anomaly because nothing much happens on Christmas. December 25th is not the time when people are taking their spare overtime hours to log their cases with the CDC, or even to answer the phone when the New York Times calls, and so we just don't get data, and then it all ends up piling up on the next day, and we'll get an exceptionally high day on the 26th, or the 27th, or maybe the 28th, because weekends are also low for the same reason. So is this little downtick in the United States real? Well, maybe. Certainly there's been, as we've seen, there's been some trend towards the United States to drop, but then it keeps getting interrupted by things like Thanksgiving. And so it's possible. The trend has been for the growth rate to drop in the United States. The broad trend is that the growth rate of the United States has been dropping, but with the interruptions of different holidays, it's really hard to tease apart whether this drop is just one brought on by the lower reporting of the holidays, which then might be completely counteracted by the actual new cases caused by people spending time with members outside their household on the holidays, or whether this is really the actual beginning of a drop. But certainly we are seeing the best short-term drop in the United States that we've seen really ever. We've never seen such a drop as that. Probably a data anomaly, but we'll see. We'll keep watching. All right. I am trying to move through this quickly, so let me just, those are the countries. I do want to show the growth rates. Growth rates by country. If you look at the growth rates by country, this is a pretty mixed bag, not a really good graph here. These are the top 20 only. I'll probably just stick with those for now. The rest are not contributing as many cases, so it's not they're not as important in terms of the total cases of the world. But if you do want to see them, that's this graph down there. You can go to gregfarrar.us and look at that graph yourself to break it down by any other country. But for the top 20, Israel growing. Anything above 20 here, 20%, I consider to be a pretty bad number. So 45% weekly growth for Israel is terrible, and it's just been rising and rising. So Israel is really a new epicenter. We saw that as well in the first graph. The United Kingdom, even worse, really, the speed at which its growth is growing, where it was in this nice place of shrinking 22% a week, and now it's rising by 40% a week. And it's not showing much of a sign of flattening out either, maybe just a little bit here at the end. So the UK really in trouble, and hence everyone's closing their borders. And plus they have a new strain that everyone's suddenly terrified of, though I will just take a moment to say we don't yet have enough information to be terrified of that new strain. It might spread faster. It does not seem to be immune to the vaccine. I think we need more data before we start freaking out about the new strain, but it might be something to freak out about. But at least the evidence so far suggests that it will respond to the vaccine just like the normal strain. So as long as we get vaccinated, we're safe from it too. We just might see a bump up in the countries that catch that new strain in their growth rate and a slowing down of their recovery. Slovakia, Panama. Those are actually the only countries that look bad from a growth perspective of the top 20 hottest in daily cases per million. And notably, that means the United States is not a country that looks bad from a growth perspective. In fact, let's look at the United States. This is certainly the happiest graph, probably for me, the happiest graph of the day. The United States has turned the corner in growth. It is actually showing at the moment a negative growth. And this is not just some Christmas December 25th anomaly because of low reporting, though that contributes to it, because we've seen this, messed it up there. We've seen this descending steadily since December 16th. It's been going down in a straight linear fashion. We mentioned this last week. If this keeps going, we said we're going to drop below zero, and the United States will turn the corner and will peak and will begin to decline, except that the holidays are coming. So we saw something very similar happening in Thanksgiving from November 16th, exactly 1 month earlier. November 16th it peaked, and it just headed downward and downward right until, what was this Thanksgiving? I can't remember, 26th maybe, 27th. If it was the 26th, the momentum continued very strongly, well, for a good week past Thanksgiving, before it suddenly curved back upwards. This was arguably caused by people getting new infections at Thanksgiving events. The timing is about right. It always, as I've mentioned in some of my recent streams, it seems a little late to have been caused by Thanksgiving. I would have expected that to have happened maybe on December 2nd. That the peak of the turnaround would have been there. Instead, the peak is quite a bit later. But okay, I hear from some other experts that this was maybe a reasonable time for the Thanksgiving turnaround to occur. But in any case, if the curve continues the way it did for Thanksgiving, we're certainly not going to see a spike of new cases today, 2 days after Christmas. We might see a spike of new cases starting 5 days after Christmas. But if this continues the way it has, then we'll see a good week of downward trend after Christmas, which means that we'll probably get down to, negative 10% before the holidays can have a big impact. maybe people are getting together on Christmas Eve, or maybe they're meeting earlier, or maybe there are the other holidays that aren't Christmas that are happening a little bit before then. So it's possible we'll start to see a turnaround as soon as now. Anyway, if I had to guess, I would say we probably will see something like this coming out of here, but we're starting from a lower place. And so with a little luck, it will not, it'll probably cross zero again, but it hopefully won't get back up to 14%. And even if it does, again, 20% is not good, but it's not terrible. 20%, under 20% means that the United States has for some time not been a growth hotspot. It hasn't been a growth hotspot since the 25th of November, before Thanksgiving. And now it has the glorious distinction of being, well, let's see, how many are there? There are actually quite a lot of them. So it's not a distinction, but it does have a negative growth rate for a moment. Most of the top 20 countries have a positive growth rate. The United States is actually doing better than most. There are a few of these, the other top 20s, Georgia, Serbia, Croatia, Azerbaijan, Moldova, and Portugal, mysteriously. Palestine, Slovenia. Geographically, you may be seeing the trend there. There's a real sense that the European wave has moved east. So yeah, good news for the United States, probably bad news coming for the United States. Regardless, though, there's still at least a couple of hard weeks coming for the United States healthcare system, because back around here, this was around the time that people were saying the healthcare system was overloaded. The ICUs, especially in Southern California and elsewhere as well, other southern states, Texas and Florida and Georgia, we're starting to get this a feel of overload, especially bad in California, because California has fewer beds per person than most places, fewer than it should, perhaps. But in any case, back here, we were starting to get the alarm signals that we were going to overload the system. And ever since then, this entire curve has been above zero. And so if this was where we were overloaded or about to be overloaded, we've been overloading past the overload point ever since then. And all this growth has just been piling into overloaded hospitals. The stories we hear from Southern California are pretty dire. Hospitals with beds in the gift shop, hospitals with people sitting, we can't even find gurneys for them, people sitting in chairs in closets. I have a personal anecdote about that. Not that I sat in a chair in a closet, but that I know somebody who knows somebody who was sitting in a modified chair in a closet in the hospital, in hospitals that are full of nothing but COVID patients. So the situation is dire and will continue to be, even after cases cross zero for the United States. There's still a couple weeks lag before the hospitalizations will start to drop. So if we're lucky, and if the holidays somehow don't do this to us again, then we might see in 2 weeks that the hospitalization situation will get better. If we're unlucky and it does this again, then we have a period where we're just going to keep seeing hospitalizations grow. But hopefully there will at least be a short period where they drop, because once this is below zero, a couple weeks later, hospitalizations start to drop below zero. So, but until we can get and stay below zero, we're still in trouble in the healthcare system. All right, I'm well over time for the supposed 30-minute thing. Let's see. I'm not going to be talking too much about counties either, so maybe I'll just spin through the counties real quick after this, and maybe we will make 30 minutes, but probably not. Let's go on to the states, though. Tennessee, which was really, really terrible, is now really terrible. At 1,500, 2,000 in severity. Now we're counting again the unified metric of severity, but at least it's getting better. But still, anything over 200 is just bad in severity. However, unlike the countries report, there is a clear trend that every one of the worst states, almost every one, is getting better in severity. Everyone's headed downward. So though they're all way over 200, making them very severely hit, all states are declining. There may be a few exceptions, maybe Oklahoma, for instance. But that's good. Either that means their growth rates are declining at this point, probably because they all have a lot of cases to be in this list at all. And if you look at all the states combined, I guess I've already zoomed in on this, That was foresightiful of me. Anyway, if you look at all the states and territories, same deal. Everyone's declining. So this is a nice graph in a sense. It's a nice graph in the sense that we're going into a better place than the place we are right now, but it's a bad graph in the sense that with very few exceptions, Iowa, Idaho, maybe Washington State, Hawaii, all of these, all the states, all 50 plus territories are severely impacted right now by the virus. They all have very high severity. Let's break that severity down. Let's do it and do growth rates first. I'm going to use the New York Times data again because I just like it better. This data I was using before says crazy things like no cases in California recently. Okay, where's the New York Times data? Here's the New York Times growth data. Just the top 20. And if we look at this, actually this is generally just a good graph. There's not. We could wish there were no virus at all in the United States. That would be a great graph. But given how bad things have been, this is really a good graph. Again, 20% growth is the place at which I start to say there's a real problem. That's a growth hotspot. We don't have any of those, not one. Even California, the very worst state in growth, is under 20% at 17. Now it was up at 65 just a few weeks ago, so it's made a tremendous improvement. And so have many others, like Massachusetts, which was ridiculously high, is actually shrinking by 8% a day. And most of these top 20 hottest states in daily cases per million are shrinking. Most of them are shrinking. They're below that zero line. Their growth rate is negative. There are just a few clustered here that don't have a negative growth rate. And then there's California, which has a pretty solid high growth rate, but its growth rate is descending rapidly. So a lot of these states have turned the corner, the hardest hit ones. Certainly the whole northern section of the country that was in such bad shape. Let's just look at North Dakota, for instance. North Dakota, it's not even on the top 20, which is why I had to go to this graph. Well, it's wiggling all over the place. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more. North Dakota, I'm not sure I quite believe that there's some spikiness to this graph that suggests they're reporting in batches. So it's not as smooth a curve as it would be if this were the actual real data. Let me see if South Dakota does any better. South Dakota may be a better metric of how it's doing. It seems to be reporting more consistently, so we get a smoother graph. But South Dakota has been below zero since late November. And so that November wave that started in the Dakotas and has spread out in concentric circles, it's reached the coasts, California, Texas, well, Georgia, I guess, Florida sort of, but the South anyway, if not the coast. But it's the original states, the ones that were really hit, not anymore. 27% drop every day in South Dakota, and it's been doing that for a long time. And just as California being consistently above zero for a long time led to a really high number, this one being consistently below zero for a long time will lead to a really low total number. Let's see what its total number is. I'm just going to zip up here and take a look at what is actually happening on a daily cases perspective in South Dakota. Yeah, and you see this. Now, only because things have been so bad does this seem to be a low number, because South Dakota still has 400 daily cases per million. 200 is a hot spot. 100 is a warm spot. 400, and if you look at the history of it, it lived in the two digits forever. So South Dakota went to the top of a very high mountain, 1,700 daily cases per million, almost unprecedented in the infection rates that were happening. And now it's dropped off very sharply, but not yet to a good level. So if I lived in South Dakota, I would still not be going outside right now. I would still say 400 is a really bad number. It's dangerous to be in or I wouldn't be in the company of others. Maybe I'd go outside by myself. It's dangerous to be in the company of others right now in South Dakota, but not nearly as dangerous as it was a few weeks ago. So going back to the growth graph, and we're kind of going to see this anywhere we look. Anytime you see a state that's below zero and has been for a while, that means that state has peaked in cases. So picking at random Vermont here, Actually, let's pick one let me look at some of my usual states. Okay, well, looking at Ohio for a minute, Ohio's hovering near zero, so not a great example. Let's look at Texas. Perfect. So here's Texas. Texas has been shrinking for a while. It peaked, it turned the corner around December 20th. So now on the 7th, 1 week later, it's been shrinking and even accelerating in how fast it's been shrinking. So good news for Texas. Those who happen to be healthcare workers in Texas, I might know one, can be reasonably confident that in about a week, the number of admissions should start dropping to hospitals, because that's when Texas turned the corner, and it seems to be holding steady here. Now, maybe it's going to have its, maybe after that, it will have its post-holidays upslope like it did after Thanksgiving, and maybe we'll start to see the number rising again. But there should at least be a period of a week or more. It's going to be more because this is still headed downward. A week or more in Texas where I would expect hospital admissions to start dropping and to accelerate and drop. And they're going to look just like this. It's just going to be that it'll start on the, what would that be? Something like the 3rd of January. Somewhere on the 3rd of January, the hospital admissions may reach their peak and then start dropping just like this down to the point they're dropping at a rate of 20% a week later. I can't predict beyond then because we don't know where this curve's going, and this curve determines that curve. But that's good news for the healthcare system in Texas, at least. Sadly, we can't say something as nearly as good as that for California. Well, first of all, this is the Corona scraper data, which I don't like as much. Let me look at the New York Times data and see if everything I said is a lie. I think that it's probably going to be similar. Texas, the two data sets tend to be, well, this is surprisingly different, but the broad picture is the same. It was down and then it went up and then it's down. It doesn't have quite the smoothness, and it wasn't until December 23rd that it actually turned the corner. So it might be a few more days, but it is still dropping 20% a day in Texas, according to this other data source. So the broad picture remains that in a couple weeks, we can expect hospital admissions to drop in Texas. And whether they start rising again depends on whether we have one of these for the Christmas holidays. Okay, I'll take another quick look. Definitely not going to be a half-hour one, but I'll see if I can make this a little shorter. Let's just look at what else. Anything else here that I want to look at? I'll look at my usual suspects states. But the big picture here certainly is good in that we're heading in the right direction. And in fact, that most states are shrinking. Before we were headed, last time I talked, I think we were headed in the right direction, but most states were still rising in cases. Now we're getting to the place where it could be, if this trend continues, which it won't because of the holidays, we will see in a couple of weeks or a week or so that all these states are below zero. And then the country as a whole will certainly be shrinking by then. At this point, the country is only rising because California is growing so fast. Everyone else is pulling it down broadly, and California is, and again, by rising, I mean it has a very high positive growth rate, 17%. But as California also finally gets pulled to zero, then there will be nothing to keep the country up anymore, and we should see a peak of the national numbers, as we just saw we're seeing right now. Okay, a few other, picking out a few more. What's this doing here? Just to look at the status, and again, look at that. That's really a nice direction we're seeing here. And even ignoring the Thanksgiving bump, the general long-term trend since November 18th is clearly downward. The Thanksgiving bump did not lose us that trend. It just put a little bit of a hill in it. But back then, the average was probably around 30%. For the middle of this rope was around 30%. Now the average is around negative 16%. So the long-term trend for the country has been quite good. Add on top of that, the vaccine. Let's talk vaccine for a minute. As at this point, well, they say that herd immunity arrives at, let's say, 70%. Numbers are very wildly, but at herd immunity, if we reach that, we just won't get any more cases or any more waves. We'll get more cases. We just won't get more waves, big waves like epidemic across the country waves. We're not there yet. At this point, estimates say that 10% of the country is probably immune. I'm going out on a limb here by saying that 10% of the country has gotten the virus. That's not much of a limb. The antibody testing is pretty clear on that. 10% of the country has gotten the virus. And B, 1% of the country has gotten the vaccine. So right now we have 11% immunity in the country, and that's just based almost entirely on people who've actually caught and recovered from the disease. But that rate of vaccination is going to at least continue. So I'm guessing, what's it been, a couple weeks now, we might be able to keep doing 1% every couple weeks, or maybe 1% every week. If we can keep that pace, then 50 weeks from now, 1 year from now, we will have vaccinated the whole country. Is that right? Or not the whole country, but we will have gotten into striking distance of herd immunity. I would also hope that vaccination will speed up. We should get a bunch of different vaccines. There are dozens in the pipeline. We only have the 2 now, but we'll get a lot more. And there appears to be a willingness by about 60% of the country to take the vaccine. That willingness, even if it doesn't rise, as long as it doesn't fall, add that to the 10, we probably can barely get herd immunity. But even if we don't get herd immunity, even if we get 40% of people vaccinated, that's still going to put quite a damper on the curve. So we're at the beginning of a slow drop of this curve, an inexorable drop of the curve. It may have new waves. It may have new bumps like this. We may have one after Christmas. I don't know, we'll have one in the spring, I don't know, but the downward trend is going to be bracketed by the envelope that's created by that vaccine and by all the vaccinations. Months to go before that's there, and so there will probably be some more unfortunate wavage of this graph before then, but it will probably never be able to get as high as the thing we just saw. Okay, looking just a few others. Georgia, I'm just pretty much ignoring the total cases, the DCPM this time, just because I'm wanting to make this quick. And really, this does show, I think the most important number probably is the growth. If it's above 0, we're fine in the long term. I mean, we're below 0, we're fine in the long term. If it's above 0, we're not. Georgia is not yet fine. It's still growing 10%, but at least it's not growing 20% and it's not growing 50% like it was before. So it's following the same pattern that we're seeing in a lot of places. And Georgia is actually one of the ones that has been called out recently in the news as one of the hot spots. So I think the news, as always, doesn't look at this graph. The news does not look at the change in growth rates over time. They're just looking at the total cases and saying, oh, Georgia's rising. And it is. It's rising. As long as this line stays above 0, Georgia will be rising. But it's this line, the growth rate is falling. And as soon as that crosses 0, then finally the news will notice that something happened. But it's something that we knew was coming as soon as it started trending downward in December. We can guess it's going to turn the corner. Maybe not permanently, but it's going to turn the corner. So Georgia's headed in a good direction, but has got to get below 0 before it's safe. And just to show you the way that I think of things here, you don't really know. You certainly don't know whether it's safe from that number. 10% growth rate doesn't say anything about how safe it is. The number that I use to estimate safety is daily cases per million, and roughly I'd say it's safe if the number is under 200, or at least barely safe. It's really safe if the number's under about 15. Back in the day when 200 seemed like a really big number, I would talk about 15 as the target, saying, okay, New York has gotten DCPM under 15. They really have a lid on this. And then 50 started seeming okay because there was so much higher. Now here's Georgia at 600. It's not safe in Georgia. No one should be hanging out in bars in Georgia. Or with members of other households. It's just very dangerous in Georgia right now. Until this drops, and at this point, as you see, it is still rising, roughly. Until this drops below at least 200, I'd say I would not be wanting to well, I was going to say I wouldn't want to move to Georgia, but since I live in California and Colorado, alternating, on average, I've got it just about as bad as Georgia. But I wouldn't move from Colorado to California right now, because California has 1,000, which means it's particularly unusually unsafe in the land of California, whereas Colorado still not safe at 400, but headed in the right direction. So if you want to do this analysis yourself, go find your own state. If you live in Hawaii, you're doing pretty well. That's actually under 100. If you live in Idaho, not so well. And there's almost no state really where it's currently safe to be mingling households by that reckoning. Nowhere. You look at them all. There's almost nowhere where it's safe. Everything above about this line is just stay inside and wait for it to pass. And the good news is it is passing. It's obviously passing. You can see from this graph that this is passing. We may get another bump for the holidays, but eventually this will pass. And until then, if you can possibly bear to, stay inside. I skipped holiday in Atlanta. I skipped Thanksgiving in, well, I don't even know where I would have had Thanksgiving, but I ended up spending it just with my pod. I know a lot of people who, my mom skipped a holiday in Ohio, and my sister skipped a holiday, or at least took a very locked down holiday in Ohio. A lot of people are not traveling right now and not mixing right now, and it's a real shame. My eldest would like to have a New Year's Eve party. No, we don't have a New Year's Eve party. Of course we don't have a New Year's Eve party. I know that it's Colorado, and that makes it a little bit better because it's, look at that. Look at how much better it is. But you don't have a New Year's Eve party when the cases are at 400 daily cases per million. That's not smart. You have it when they're 50, maybe then you start mixing. 100, maybe. 200 would be crazy, but 400 is right out. The fact that they've had COVID and recovered from it means they probably wouldn't get infected. Oh, and that gets to the other point. I forget exactly. Earlier, I was saying I was going out on a limb in two ways, and I forget exactly what I was pointing to. But I just do want to say that my guess from my admittedly lay person's knowledge of epidemiology and immunology. I'm above the average college graduate in these topics, but I don't have a PhD and I haven't done research, so take it with a grain of salt. My guess is that once you've had coronavirus, you are probably immune for a period of months, typically immune. And I read this in some places, but mostly what you read is, we don't know. We don't really know. We don't know. And it's true we don't know, but I do think it's once you've had it, you are safer than others. And that means that once you've been vaccinated, you're safer than others, because that's just sort of another way of pretending you've had the virus. So in that sense, now that my eldest has recovered, I actually feel a lot better about them going off and doing things in the world a little bit, because I do believe that the risks are, in all probability, not in certainty, because we don't have the studies yet, but in all probability, based on other coronaviruses, which we do know behave in this way, once you've had the coronavirus, you are probably protected for a period of months, maybe even years, from getting it again. There are very few cases you will find of people who've gotten it twice. So, and that ties into the whole big picture, because that 10%, the 10% of people who've had it already, they probably still have immunity. And so when I say we're already at 11%, I am going out on a limb because we don't have the solid data on that, but saying that as a well-educated layperson, my best guess is that 11% of the country is immune right now. Right now, even people who got it in March, I would say, are probably mostly partially protected right now, which will help drive these numbers down. All right, enough, I say, of the states. So I'm already 10 minutes over my planned time. I'm going to head on to the counties. But again, the news for the states is good. There's always these sort of on the one hand, on the other hand, that I always come back to this place. There's good and bad news for the states. And on the one hand, the states are terribly high in cases. On the other hand, the growth rate of cases is dropping fairly quickly across almost every state. So we're in a really bad place, but we're moving towards a better place. We'll see what the holidays do to us. That's the states. All right, zipping through the counties. One of the reasons I'm not going to spend too much time on counties also is that I have progressively less confidence in this data. The Corona data scraper is actually okay, but where's the other one? The other one I use, actually maybe this is okay. I thought, well, okay. The data set that I have the most confidence in right now is the New York Times data set. COVID tracker is the one that I've been moving away from, and I was getting that confused with Corona data scraper. This one's okay, though we sometimes will see some numbers where I'm just not quite sure that they're accurate. But actually, I think I'll step back from saying I'm not sure about this data. Maybe we'll spend a little more time with it. When I was looking at it earlier, I was thinking, some of these numbers are wrong and we are missing usually, and we know that some of the numbers are missing or wrong in Corona, what's the other one? COVID tracker. So does that mean that these numbers are wrong? This, I believe, is yet another volunteer effort to do it, to collect the data, and it's broadly correct, but it can miss data sometimes. Still, it's the best we got, and when we look at these numbers, they tend to match other numbers. Like the total pattern of the counties combined matches the total pattern of the state as described by the New York Times data set. And I believe in that one more because people are being paid to do it. I think there's something to be said for that, the actually having an organization and money behind it rather than a bunch of volunteers. It's kind of the open source thing. Open source works until it doesn't. And the best open source is the open source that has a company behind it. So New York Times is behind this open source data set that I'm using for the states. Nobody's behind this that I'm aware of. So nevertheless, let me skip severity and just go straight to daily cases. So daily cases, 200 is a hot spot. 100 is a warm spot. And you can see the very best county here. Humboldt has 186 daily cases per million. So it's just barely not a hot spot. Everyone else is. Every single county. I think I may throw out some of the really small counties, but all the counties of any size at all are, well, not only are they hot, but they're not clearly peaking or dropping. Some of them are, like Imperial, peaked way up here and is dropping down to the still terrible 1,200. Tuolumne peaked at 1,700, has dropped down to 1,600, still terrible. But mostly California, it's what I see here is that it's generally rising. But we'll see. We'll see when we get to the growth rates. There are certainly some counties that are dropping. Let's look at Los Angeles, though. Los Angeles is the county that actually pushes the state numbers. And it's just bad. This is just bad. There's nothing good here. It's been rising for the whole couple months. And now it's at 1,400. So Southern California, as we've seen, is just very hard hit. I'm gonna pop over here if I can. Do I have this? Yeah, let me just make sure this actually shows when I show it. Does it show you when I look at this tab? I think it does. California. So here the case count. There's some sort of a hint that California as a whole may be dropping a little bit. But yeah, you can see this. But really I wanted to show the map. If you squint, it's very clear that Northern California has it a lot better than Southern California. But that said, if you look at, for instance, the county of Santa Cruz, California, which is kind of in the middle of the state and also kind of in the middle in terms of redness. Santa Cruz is at oops, what happened there? It's at 620. I multiply by 10 because they're doing it per 100,000 and I do it per million. 620 daily cases per million. And that's a terrible number. 200 is a bad number. And so even Santa Cruz, which is this moderate in some senses, county here in the middle of the state, in the middle of the spectrum of COVID-ness, not in the middle of the spectrum politically, I might add, but in the middle of the spectrum of COVID-ness, we see it's really bad. And so you look down at like San Bernardino, this is a county of no small number of people, 1580, huge number of cases. You look up at wow, I don't even know this one. This is one of the ones that I toss because it's so small, but Humboldt in population, there's not many people live there. Humboldt, for instance, 210, just barely a hot spot, but even Northern California is a hot spot. Even Northern California needs to be careful right now. Southern California is just off the charts, but Northern California is by no means good. And Central, the Bay Area is, there are all these different shades of orange. It's not Bay Area, really. What's going on? Why am I not finding what I think are Bay Area counties? Contra Costa? Maybe I've just never gone above these 5. I don't think of Contra Costa as a Bay Area county, but it really is right on, kind of on the bay. All right, maybe I need a geography lesson. But San Francisco, 290, hot spot. Alameda, 530, very hot. Santa Clara, 620, very hot. Santa Cruz, also 620, very hot. And then there's Monterey, which really isn't a Bay Area county, but it's the Monterey Bay, but it's above 1,000. So, and San Benito, we've just got some really bad news here in California. But the big picture is that the north is hot and the south is blazing hot. So yes, Los Angeles then. If this starts turning downward, and we could make an argument that it's flattening out. I mean, there's a wiggle here, but broadly speaking, it's probably flattening out. We'll see more on the growth chart. If Los Angeles turns downward, the total state numbers will turn downward because it is just where a lot of the population is. But generally, county's not looking good. There is, however, I think, a touch of good news. It's not as good as the news on the state level. I'm going to zoom to get rid of some of the more outlying ones, though I will mention that Fresno seems to be off the charts in growth rate right now. But if you look at the rest, the top 20 in daily cases per million, these are all growing, every single one of them. Sutter really trying to cross 0, but it hasn't quite done it. Everyone else is growing. So all the counties of California are growing in new cases, and that's not good, especially given the healthcare crisis that's happening in the South and really everywhere. So we got nothing but bad coming for California in the short term. But the downward slope of almost all these lines is a good sign. This is a trend that points towards us turning the corner in all these counties in the next month or two. Some cases weeks, in this case days. Turning the corner and actually starting to see some of the cases drop. On the other hand, we saw something like a downward trend there that was wrecked by Thanksgiving, or at least wrecked around the time of Thanksgiving. Correlation does not imply causation. We do not know that Thanksgiving is the reason this went up, but it's a good theory. And if the theory is correct, then it's also a good theory to say Christmas is going to do the same thing. The holidays, the winter holidays are going to do the same thing. So there's a chance that this was some sort of a fluke and that these lines will continue trending downward without interruption until they hit 0, and then everything's shrinking. That's only the first stage, because after that we actually have to shrink down into out of hotspot territory and towards 0 before we can really be over it. But at least... let's put it this way. There are 3 things that happen in order. The first thing is the growth rate starts to drop. The second thing is the growth rate hits 0 and the cases start to drop. And the third thing is the cases drop to a manageable level. At this point, we're in phase 1 of that. The growth rate is dropping. But we're not at phase 2, where the growth rates hit 0 by any means. We have, again, 20% is kind of a bad number for growth rate, and most of these are above 20, or maybe half of them are. So we're not in a good place with growth rates yet. but they're trending in the right direction. And then even after they hit zero, that just indicates the peak of cases. It doesn't indicate that we're done. So California has a long way to go, is looking quite bad, but at least it's not looking like it did back here where the growth rates were rising. The growth rates are falling. Okay, that's my 30-minute live stream that I managed to cram into 50 minutes. I will stop there. My name's Greg Farrar. I'll probably do another one of these because I watch this stuff continually. I'm always tuning into these graphs, my own graphs. I'm just looking at all the time, and actually even more looking at the New York Times numbers. Oh, I do want to say one thing just as sort of a happy moment here. There are happy moments. And again, I'll just say New York Times is chosen not because of a political position. They are very much a leftist newspaper, but that's not why I'm bringing them out. I'm bringing them out because they have great numbers. They're just putting a lot of money and human power into tracking their numbers and giving numbers that are at least as good as everyone else. And the right-wing news sources that I also extensively consume, they just don't, like Washington Times, they have nothing. They have nothing when it comes to numbers. The news they provide is accurate and good, and I do enjoy reading it, but they don't have this. So here we are in the New York Times. This is this number I've been watching with great anticipation. It was at 90%, or at least above 80 at one point, at the worst. And I was just shaking my head. Like, I can't believe it. We're growing at a 90% rate every 14 days. Crazy growth rates. And then it dropped and it dropped and it dropped and it dropped. And it got down to about zero around Thanksgiving. And then it started rising again. And I was thinking, uh-oh. It never got really high, though. Never, I think, got back up to 40, which is my 20% since I do it weekly. Never got up to 20% weekly. I'll use their metrics. Never got up to 40% per fortnight. And then it started dropping again. And just, I think, on the 25th, it actually dropped below zero. And then it went to -11, and now it's up to -9. It doesn't mean much, but it does mean that we've come a long way from 80%. Is it now that since it was -11 and now it's -9, is the United States trending slightly upward again because of the holidays? Maybe. Or is it just that it dropped down to -11 because there was a super high underreporting of cases on the 25th, 91,000 cases? Is not how many actually occurred on the 25th, I'm sure. Probably twice that many, but that's how many were reported, and that pulled the number down, and now the 26th has recovered and in fact overshot a little bit, so maybe those two together are a fair average. But anyway, I'm watching this number very closely, and I'm very pleased to see it below zero, and I really hope it stays there. I'll have another live stream probably. I don't know. I can never guess, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's another one in a week because there's going to be something interesting happening, I think. Let's say I'll have another live stream if there's something interesting happening in these graphs in the next week. Something like continued decline, surprise, or continued turnaround and rise, not so surprise. If either of those happen, then I will probably have another one. If it's sort of wishy-washy, we don't really know what's happening, somewhere in the middle, then maybe I won't bother until the picture clears up a little bit and we can see where we're headed. I'm Greg Farrar. Thanks for listening.